In the far reaches of the northern lands lay the kingdom of Luara, a realm of endless twilight where snow blanketed the ground like sheets of glass and the moon never truly left the sky. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that carried the howls of wolves across the mountains like ancient songs. Every night, when the silver light brushed against the frozen peaks, the people of Luara whispered blessings to the moon, for they believed it protected them from the creatures that stalked the darkness. The wolves were feared and revered in equal measure, symbols of both death and loyalty, hunters and guardians. Within the towering palace of frost and stone lived Princess Nyla, daughter of the late Queen Amara, who had been loved as fiercely as the northern wind itself. Nyla had inherited her mother's warmth, a rare gift in a land carved by ice. Her beauty was quiet, her strength subtle, and her kindness unshakable. She was known for walking the forest paths alone, unarmed, unafraid. The villagers often spoke of how she would kneel beside the wounded animals and sing to them softly, how the wolves never harmed her, how they seemed to lower their heads as she passed. Some said the moon itself followed her, a pale guardian watching over the one whose heart mirrored its light. But not everyone admired her light. Queen Sapphira, her stepmother, arrived at Luara draped in silks that shimmered like snow, her beauty sharp as ice and her voice honeyed with deceit. She came from the southern lands where the sun ruled the sky, and she despised the cold, despised the wolves and most of all, despised the quiet love the people of Luara showed their princess. Sapphira had married the king for power, but the people whispered Nyla's name more than hers. They saw hope in Nyla's eyes and gentleness in her words, qualities Sapphira could neither imitate nor destroy with charm. Each passing season deepened Sapphira's resentment. She watched from her window as Nyla rode through the snow-covered forests, her cloak trailing behind her like the edge of dawn. She heard the servants speak fondly of how the princess rescued a wounded cub, feeding it from her own hands. Even the soldiers spoke of her courage, for Nyla feared neither beast nor blizzard. Sapphira began to realize that her crown rested on fragile ice. The people might bow to her, but their hearts already belonged to another. The king, blind in his affection for his new wife, did not see the growing tension between his daughter and the queen. He mistook Sapphira's envy for worry, her false smiles for care. When Sapphira spoke softly about Nyla's reckless attachment to the forest, he nodded thoughtfully, believing she only wanted to protect the princess. Yet behind those soft words, Sapphira's mind was weaving something far darker, a plan born from fear, jealousy, and the whispers of power she believed the wolves had granted Nyla. The nights in Luara grew longer. The moon swelled in the sky, casting silver light over every corner of the frozen land. And with each passing night, the wolves grew bolder. Their howls sounded closer to the palace walls, echoing in the halls like prophecies. The servants began to speak in hushed voices, saying the wolves were calling to their princess, that they had come to warn her of something unseen. Nyla felt it too, in her dreams, in the shiver of the air when she stepped outside, in the way the wolves' eyes glowed brighter when they saw her. Sapphira noticed this change as well, and it only deepened her suspicion. She began to think that Nyla's connection to the wolves was unnatural, perhaps even dangerous. In her mind, the girl had become a threat, a rival not just to her power but to her very existence. And so, she began to whisper lies into the king's ear. Lies that Nyla was no longer entirely human. Lies that her late mother's blood had been touched by the forest spirits, that the wolves were her kin, that her bond with them was not of affection but of control. The king, torn between love and doubt, could not sleep. The more he looked upon his daughter, the more he saw the strange light that seemed to follow her, the same light that Sapphira had called dangerous. And yet, when Nyla smiled, it was still his little girl, the one who once sang to him as a child. But fear has a way of twisting even the purest memories. And under Sapphira's constant manipulation, that fear began to grow like frost over his heart. Nyla, unaware of the shadows tightening around her, continued her quiet life among the wolves and the woods. But she could sense the shift in the air, the way the servants avoided her eyes, the way the king's voice trembled when he spoke to her, the way the queen's smile grew sharper. The wolves too grew restless. They howled not in song but in warning. The bond between them pulsed stronger than ever, as though something ancient stirred beneath the snow. On the eve of the full moon, the air in Luara turned still. Not even the trees dared to move. The river froze mid-current, and the wolves' howls carried an edge of sorrow. Something was coming, a betrayal that would test the strength of both blood and moonlight. For when envy claws at innocence, even the coldest heart can burn with vengeance. And when the moon rises over Luara, it will not rise alone. Queen Sapphira's envy festered like a shadow behind the palace's glittering walls. Every day she watched from her frosted balcony as the people of Luwara bowed their heads in silent reverence, not for her crown, but for the young princess who moved among them like living moonlight. Nyla's presence had become legend. Mothers sang her name in lullabies, and hunters claimed her blessing guided them safely through the wilderness. The villagers spoke of her as the moon's child, chosen by the goddess herself to protect their land. To Sapphira, every whisper was a blade. Each prayer uttered in Nyla's name carved deeper into her pride. She saw how the people's eyes softened when they spoke of the princess, a softness they never offered their queen. And though Sapphira wore jewels worth kingdoms, she could not capture the kind of love Nyla commanded simply by being kind. That love, pure and effortless, made Sapphira feel small, a shadow beside the light. The king, once strong as the mountain winds, had grown pale and weary. His cough echoed through the halls like a drumbeat of fading strength. The royal healers came and went, shaking their heads in helplessness. Whispers began to spread that his illness was not of the body, but of the soul, that the kingdom's balance had been broken by deceit. Sapphira knew that if the king died, her throne would not be safe. The people would rally behind Nyla, the beloved princess who embodied everything Sapphira could never be. And that thought filled her with icy dread. By day, Sapphira wept beside her husband, pretending devotion. By night, she walked the dark corridors, her silks whispering like serpents. She visited the royal astrologer, demanding answers. "The moon grows brighter over the princess," the old man said softly, trembling beneath her gaze. "Her spirit has been chosen. The goddess watches her." Sapphira's hand clenched around the edge of her gown until her knuckles turned white. Chosen. The word burned her more than any curse. When she returned to her chambers, she smashed the mirrors and tore down the moonlit drapes. She could not bear to see her reflection, a queen in name but hollow within. In the silence that followed, a thought took root, dark and poisonous. If the moon favored Nyla, then the only way to break that bond was through sacrifice. She needed to make the people believe that the wolves, the goddess's creatures, demanded the princess in exchange for peace. It would be a cruel act disguised as devotion, and when the kingdom mourned, Sapphira would stand as its grieving savior. One night, she summoned her most loyal guard captain, a man whose loyalty was bought with promises of gold and power. Her voice was calm as she spoke, yet the weight of her words chilled him. "The people are restless," she said. "They whisper that the wolves grow hungry, that they wait at our borders for royal blood. The moon goddess must be appeased." She leaned closer, her eyes sharp as glass. "Tomorrow before dawn, you will take the princess into the forest. Tell the villagers it is her wish to protect them, that she goes willingly. When the sun rises, she must not return." The captain hesitated, for even the cruelest men feared the bond between Nyla and the wolves. But one glance at Sapphira's gaze, cold, unyielding and venomous, was enough to silence him. He bowed low, promising obedience. As the night deepened, Sapphira stood by her window, staring at the moon. It hung there in quiet defiance, watching her with a light that seemed to accuse. "You chose the wrong daughter," she whispered bitterly. "Let's see if your wolves can save her when she is gone." The wind hissed through the window's crack, carrying a distant howl, one that sounded hauntingly like laughter. At dawn, the guards approached Nyla's chamber. She woke to the sound of their armor and the faint smell of frost. "Princess," one said softly, eyes avoiding hers, "the queen commands your presence." Nyla, ever obedient, followed without fear. She trusted her stepmother even when others warned her not to. But as they passed through the gates and into the deep woods, unease coiled in her chest. The trees whispered like old souls, and somewhere in the distance, a single wolf howled. When they stopped at the edge of the frozen river, Nyla finally spoke. "Why have we come here?" she asked. The captain's face was stone. "The goddess demands a royal offering," he said, his voice hollow. "The queen says it is your destiny." Nyla's breath caught, her heart pounding with realization. Betrayal had a sound. It was the crunch of snow under boots walking away. She called out to them, her voice trembling, but they did not look back. They left her there, alone, surrounded by trees and silence. Back in the village, Sapphira's lies took root like vines. She wept before the people, claiming that Nyla had sacrificed herself for their safety. "The wolves demanded royal blood," she cried, her tears glinting like ice. "Our princess gave her life for the peace of Luwara." The villagers mourned, yet unease lingered in their hearts. For that night, when the moon rose high above the kingdom, the howls that echoed through the mountains were not of mourning, but of anger. The wolves had not taken their princess. They were answering her call. The forest swallowed the sound of footsteps as the guards led Nyla deeper into its heart. Frost clung to the roots, and the trees stood tall and silent like witnesses bound by oath. The moon hung low, round, heavy, and pale, spilling its silver light across the snow. Nyla's breath fogged the air before her, soft and uncertain, while behind her the soldier's armor whispered like guilt. None dared meet her eyes. They had walked for what felt like hours when the lead guard stopped beside a clearing. The river nearby shimmered faintly under the moonlight, a ribbon of frozen glass. The men shifted uneasily, glancing into the darkness beyond. Somewhere distant, a wolf's howl echoed, long, low, and mournful. It was a sound that made even the bravest of men shudder. "Why do we stop here?" Nyla asked quietly, clutching her cloak around her shoulders. She looked at them, confusion softening her features. "This path doesn't lead back to the village." The captain, a grizzled man with tired eyes, avoided her gaze. "The Queen's command ends here, Your Highness," he said, his tone forced, too formal. He gestured toward the trees. "The goddess demands a royal offering. You must wait here, until the moon sets." Nyla blinked. The words made no sense at first, like hearing a story told backward. "An offering?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "You mean me?" The man flinched at her tone but said nothing. The others shifted their weight, their breath visible in the cold. Guilt hung thick between them, heavier than the air. One of the younger guards whispered, "Forgive us, princess," before the captain silenced him with a glare. Then, without another word, they turned and began to walk away, their boots crunching in the snow. Nyla stood frozen in disbelief. "Wait," she cried, her voice breaking. "You can't leave me here." But the forest swallowed her words. Only the rustle of branches answered her, and soon, the sound of their retreat faded completely. She fell to her knees, the snow seeping through her dress. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear of death, but from the sting of betrayal. The Queen's smile flashed in her mind, that cold, perfect curve that now revealed itself as poison. Tears stung her eyes, and she pressed her palms to the earth as if to steady her heartbeat. The forest was silent for a moment, holding its breath. Then came the sound, faint at first, then rising. A chorus of howls rolled through the trees, harmonizing like 100 voices singing one lament. It was not the sound of hunger but of something older, deeper, grief, perhaps, or remembrance. Nyla rose slowly, her body trembling, her breath shallow. The darkness around her seemed alive. The air itself pulsed with unseen energy. Between the trees, shadows shifted, and then she saw them, eyes. Dozens of them, glowing gold, amber, and silver beneath the moon. They moved like flickering stars, circling her in silence. She backed away, her foot crunching on a branch. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't want to die." Her words fell into the cold air, trembling like the last leaf of winter. The largest wolf stepped forward, a massive creature with fur white as frost and eyes like molten gold. It moved with the grace of a spirit, its paws silent against the snow. Nyla's breath caught as it came closer, its head lowering, its gaze locking with hers. She expected a snarl, a flash of teeth, but instead the wolf bowed. The others followed suit. One by one they lowered their heads, encircling her not as predators but as sentinels. Their bodies formed a living wall, their warmth radiating against the cold. A wind swept through the trees, lifting Nyla's hair like a veil, and in that moment she felt it, the pulse of the earth beneath her hands, the whisper of something ancient stirring in her blood. The moon seemed to brighten, spilling its light across her face. Her fear began to fade, replaced by a strange calm that she could not explain. When she looked down, she noticed the frost melting beneath her touch, leaving the faint impression of a glowing handprint. The wolves stirred, lifting their heads, their eyes reflecting her light back to her, as if recognizing their kin. A memory surfaced, one her mother had told her before she passed. "The wolves are not beasts, my child. They are guardians of the moon. When the night grows cruel, they remember kindness." Nyla's heart clenched. She had fed these creatures once as a child, leaving scraps of bread and meat at the forest's edge while her stepmother scolded her for wasting food. Could it be they remembered? The white wolf stepped closer, pressing its forehead gently against her hand. Its fur was warm, its breath soft. A shiver ran through her as she felt a wordless understanding bloom between them, an ancient bond neither human nor animal could name. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered, her tears falling freely. "If you are the moon's children, then I am yours." The wolves howled as if answering her vow. Their voices rose together, echoing through the valley, reaching even the distant palace walls. The sound carried the truth of what had been done: betrayal, sacrifice, and awakening. The forest glowed faintly now, the trees bathed in moonlight. Nyla stood tall among her newfound guardians, her eyes reflecting the same pale silver as the night sky. The cold no longer bit her. She felt alive, her fear replaced by something fierce and unbroken. From far away, deep in her gilded chamber, Queen Sapphira stirred in her sleep. The sound of wolves howling reached her ears, and for the first time in her life she felt fear crawl beneath her skin. She rose, trembling, whispering to herself that it was only the wind. But it was not the wind. It was the song of the princess the forest refused to claim, the girl who had been left to die but was now embraced by the night itself. And as the moon climbed higher, Nyla lifted her face toward it, surrounded by her pack, her eyes glowing with the same silver light. The wolves had not taken her life. They had crowned her their own. The moon hung low over the vast forest, spilling silver light across the frost-tipped leaves. Nyla lay upon a bed of moss, the cold biting her skin, yet within her chest pulsed a strange warmth, the breath of the wolves who had chosen not to harm her. Their eyes, golden and ancient, watched her from the shadows like stars that had taken form upon the earth. When she closed her eyes, she could still feel the echo of their hearts, steady and wild, surrounding her in a rhythm that spoke more clearly than words. That night, when she finally drifted into sleep, she dreamed of a great white wolf with eyes as deep as the moon itself. It approached her slowly, its fur glimmering with light. Its voice, neither male nor female, whispered through the wind, "You are no longer prey. You are kin. The moon marks you, child of both crown and claw." Nyla woke with tears on her cheeks, not of fear but of belonging. The pack gathered around her, brushing their fur against her as though to seal the bond. In the following days the forest itself seemed to welcome her. The wind carried her scent, the trees bent slightly toward her path, and even the streams glowed faintly when she knelt to drink. She learned to move as the wolves moved, silent, graceful, each step aware of every sound and scent. Her laughter began to sound like a song the woods had long forgotten. She hunted with the pack, not out of hunger but to honor their way of life. She learned the laws of the wild, that every life taken must be respected, that strength without compassion was weakness, and that the moon saw all truth beneath the earth's silence. At dusk they would gather by the river's edge. The alpha wolf, the great white one from her dreams, stood beside her as the others howled in unison. Nyla joined in, her voice rising and blending with theirs until it was impossible to tell where human ended and wolf began. In those moments she felt the power of the moon pour into her blood. Her eyes glowed faintly silver, her movements sharper and swifter, her senses attuned to every heartbeat in the forest. The wolves began to bow to her when the moon reached its highest point, not out of submission but reverence. Word of her survival drifted through the kingdom like smoke. Hunters spoke of a ghostly maiden running with wolves, her hair silvered by moonlight, her gaze untamed. Some called her cursed, others said she was the goddess reborn. But in the heart of the forest, Nyla had shed her fear, her title, her pain. She had become something the world could neither name nor destroy, the bridge between humankind and the wild. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she would look toward the horizon where the palace lights flickered faintly. The memory of her father's gentle voice, the warmth of the people's smiles, and even her stepmother's sharp words would brush against her heart. Yet she no longer felt sorrow. She understood now that the moon had taken her not to punish her, but to prepare her. There was still a destiny awaiting her beyond the trees, and when the time came she would return, not as a helpless princess, but as a force born of both mercy and might. On the seventh night, the white wolf led her to a clearing bathed in silver light. The pack formed a circle around her, their howls rising in perfect harmony. The wind stilled, the stars seemed to hold their breath, and the moonlight descended like a veil over her. The wolf spoke once more, its voice trembling through the air like thunder wrapped in silk. "The wild has chosen you. The world above the trees has forgotten its balance. You shall remind them." As the words faded, Nyla felt a surge of power through her body. Her skin shimmered faintly, her hair reflected the light of the moon. Every heartbeat in the forest became her own. She could feel the life of every creature, the deer, the owl, the river fish, even the whisper of roots deep below. She was no longer just Nyla of Luwara, she was the moon's daughter, bound to the wolves, destined to return when the world had forgotten compassion. The wolves bowed their heads. And as the moonlight crowned her, Nyla lifted her face toward the heavens, her voice rising in a song that made the stars tremble. The forest howled back in answer, a symphony of loyalty and love. In that moment the human world lost a princess, but the wild gained its queen. In the grand halls of Luara, the scent of burning myrrh and deceit hung thick in the air. Queen Sapphira stood before her court, draped in silks that shimmered like moonlight, a cruel imitation of the very goddess she invoked in her lies. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with feverish triumph as she announced that Princess Nyla had been taken by the wolves, not by her order but by divine will. The moon, she declared, has judged her unworthy of the throne. The wolves were but the messengers of fate. The courtiers, trembling under her gaze, nodded in agreement. They whispered prayers not out of faith but out of fear. In the days that followed, the queen ruled with a newfound edge. She sealed the forest gates, forbade anyone from mentioning Nyla's name, and punished those who dared to grieve. The villagers, once filled with laughter and song, now moved through the streets like ghosts. They hung charms of bone and silver at their doors, hoping to ward off the howls that began to echo through the night. At first the sounds were distant, faint cries that blended with the wind. But as the moon waxed, the howls grew louder, clearer, more deliberate. It was as if the wolves were circling the edges of the kingdom, testing the boundaries between the wild and the crown. Shepherds swore they saw silver eyes glowing in the fields, watching the herds but never attacking. Fishermen spoke of strange ripples in the river that bordered the forest, where no creature dared drink. Whispers began to spread among the people, that the wolves were not mere beasts but spirits guarding something sacred. Some claimed that the princess's voice rode upon the wind, singing lullabies that made the torches flicker. Others said they had seen her shadow beneath the moon, a figure draped in silver, walking beside a great white wolf. Sapphira dismissed these tales as superstition, yet her nights were restless. Sleep no longer came easily. When she closed her eyes she would dream of eyes, dozens of them, staring at her through the dark. The sound of paws on stone would echo down the palace halls, though the guards swore they heard nothing. She began to light candles in every room, terrified of the shadows that clung to the corners. One evening as she sat upon her throne, a gust of wind burst through the open doors, extinguishing every flame. The court gasped as the moonlight flooded the chamber, pale and unyielding. For a heartbeat, Sapphira thought she saw a shape moving just beyond the threshold, a silhouette with flowing hair and eyes like twin moons. Her hand trembled as she called for the guards, but when they arrived there was nothing there. Only a faint trail of paw prints leading back into the dark. Rumors began to turn against her. The villagers whispered that the queen had lied, that she had sent the princess to her death out of envy. The priests of the Moon Temple, once loyal to her, grew uneasy. They had begun to dream of a silver maiden standing beneath the goddess's light, her voice commanding them to remember justice. Offerings of food and flowers started to appear at the edge of the forest, left by those who still believed Nyla lived. Desperate to maintain her power, Sapphira held a feast to honor the moon goddess, hoping to prove her devotion. The palace was filled with laughter that rang hollow, with wine that could not drown the tension. Outside, the night was heavy and still, until a howl broke through, long and mournful, echoing over the towers. Then came another and another, until it seemed the entire forest had awakened. The queen froze. The goblet in her hand shook as the howls grew louder, weaving through the air like a chant. The courtiers looked to one another in fear. Even the musicians stopped playing. And then silence. Deep, unnatural silence. It was as if the night itself held its breath. Sapphira stood slowly, her eyes drawn toward the window. The moon hung high and full, and beneath its light she could see movement among the trees, dozens of shapes, sleek and dark, circling at the forest's edge. Their eyes gleamed with purpose. For the first time she felt a chill not from the cold, but from the weight of what she had done. Still she would not yield. "They are beasts," she hissed to herself. "Nothing more. The crown fears no creature of the wild." But even as she spoke the words, the wind outside seemed to whisper something else, a name she had hoped never to hear again. Nyla. From that night on, the palace was never truly quiet. The howls came closer, curling through the walls like smoke, slipping beneath doors and around corners. Servants fled before dusk. The queen's reflection began to shift. Sometimes she swore she saw silver eyes staring back at her from the mirror instead of her own. The kingdom, once built on silver and stone, began to crumble beneath the weight of fear. And far beyond the walls, under the silver gaze of the moon, the wolves waited, not as monsters but as messengers. The forest had not forgotten, and neither had the daughter it claimed. The moon rose heavy and red above the horizon, not the soft silver glow that once caressed the kingdom of Luara, but a burning scar that stained the sky. The villagers called it the blood moon, the night when the line between the living and the spirits dissolved. Even the bravest hunters locked their doors, whispering prayers to the goddess of the wild. Deep in the heart of the forest, something ancient stirred, something that had waited, patient and silent, for this very night. The wolves gathered beneath the crimson glow. Dozens of them, their pelts glistening like shadows come alive, their eyes burning with fire that mirrored the moon. They moved in perfect silence, circling a single figure who stood at the center of a ring of stone. Nyla. Her hair flowed like liquid night down her back, and her cloak shimmered with threads of silver and frost. Around her neck hung a pendant carved from bone and moonlight, a gift from the pack, a symbol of unity between spirit and flesh. Gone was the fragile princess who had once wept for mercy. In her place stood the daughter of the moon, fierce, calm, and bound to the wild by unbreakable spirit. The wolves bowed their heads as she raised her hand. The air trembled with power, and the red moon above seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "The time has come," she whispered, her voice echoing through the trees like wind through hollow stone. "The forest remembers and the crown will answer." The wolves lifted their heads and howled as one, a sound that split the night open. It rolled through the forest, through the meadows, and into the distant village where candles flickered and prayers faltered. The people trembled, sensing that something greater than vengeance was on the move. Nyla began to walk, each step measured, each breath steady. The earth itself seemed to shift for her. Branches bowed low, leaves stirred though there was no wind, and the ground glowed faintly beneath her bare feet. The pack followed in silence, their paws soundless upon the moss. The river that had once divided the wild from the palace lands rose slightly as she approached, its waters parting like an old friend welcoming her home. Above them, the red moon bled light through the canopy, casting long streaks of crimson across the trees. The wolves' fur shimmered like flames in motion, their eyes glinting with something that was not just hunger but purpose. As they drew nearer to the edge of the forest, the lights of the palace flickered faintly in the distance, golden towers glinting like the bones of an old beast under dying light. The air grew colder. Nyla could feel the pulse of the kingdom she had once called home, its heartbeat uneven, choked by fear and deceit. She stopped for a moment at the crest of a hill. From there, the palace stood clearly visible, bathed in the eerie red glow of the moon. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, so softly that only the wolves closest to her could hear, "The blood she spilled will not go unanswered. The forest does not forget." One of the older wolves, his fur streaked with white, stepped beside her. His voice rumbled in her mind like distant thunder. "You lead us, daughter of the moon. Will you bring death or will you bring balance?" Nyla's eyes shone, silver and sorrowful. "Both," she said. "For to heal a wound one must first cut away the rot." And with that she descended the hill. The ground shook faintly beneath the pack's advance. Owls took flight from the trees, and the night seemed to hold its breath. When the first paw touched the cobblestone of the palace road, every torch along the walls flickered and went out. Guards looked up in confusion, their armor glinting faintly in the red light. Then they heard it, the sound of paws, dozens, hundreds, moving in perfect unison. The gates shuddered as the wolves appeared from the darkness, eyes burning, teeth bared, yet not charging. They waited, poised, their leader standing before them like a shadow carved from moonlight. The guards raised their spears but their hands shook. Some dropped their weapons altogether, for they recognized the figure at the front, the princess they had abandoned to the forest. Her face glowed with quiet fury, her gaze colder than the northern wind. "Open the gates," she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. It was not a request. The captain hesitated, then took a trembling step back. The heavy doors creaked open, their sound echoing like the groan of an old secret being released. Inside the palace, the queen awoke to the sound of the howls drawing closer. Her mirror trembled on the wall, showing not her reflection but a vision of red eyes and silver light. Servants ran through the halls screaming that the wolves had come, that the moon had turned against the crown. As Nyla crossed the threshold into the courtyard, the moonlight intensified until the very stones glowed beneath her feet. Her wolves fanned out, silent and waiting. The scent of fear filled the air, sharp and heavy. She looked up toward the highest tower where the queen stood, her silk gown rippling like blood under the red moon. For a long moment, the two women stared at one another across the distance, one wrapped in gold and deceit, the other cloaked in fur and light. Then, with a single gesture, Nyla raised her hand toward the moon. The wolves howled, the ground trembled, and the gates of the palace swung fully open. The hunt for truth had begun. Sapphira jolted awake to the sound of claws scraping marble and deep growls reverberating through the palace halls. The golden chandelier above her bed quivered, scattering shards of red light across the room from the moon outside. She sat up, her heart hammering wildly. The air itself felt different, thick, alive, and humming with something ancient and cold. From somewhere beyond her chamber doors came the unmistakable rhythm of paws, soft but deliberate, too many to count. Servants screamed in the corridors, their voices cut short by an eerie silence that followed like breath after a scream. Then came the low, mournful howl. It rose through the palace like a memory returning home. Sapphira stumbled to her feet, clutching her silk robe around her. She rushed to the balcony and threw open the doors. What she saw froze her blood. The courtyard below was alive with movement, dozens of wolves pacing in circles, their eyes glinting red in the moonlight. The torches had all been extinguished, and the only light that remained was the burning glow of the blood moon above. At their center stood a figure cloaked in silver fur, her long hair drifting like smoke, her gaze fixed on the palace. Nyla. The daughter she had cast to the forest. The child she had named Cursed. The girl she thought devoured by beasts, now walking among them as their queen. Sapphira stumbled back from the balcony, trembling. No, she whispered to herself. It can't be, she's dead, she has to be dead. But deep inside she knew. The forest had not taken her in vengeance, it had crowned her in truth. The doors to her chamber burst open. 2 guards ran in, panting, their armor scratched and eyes wide with terror. My queen, one shouted. The wolves, there's no stopping them. They've breached the gates. Sapphira's throat tightened. Then stop them, she snapped, though her voice wavered. They won't fight, the second guard cried. They move like shadows. They killed no one, but they look right through us, as if they're searching for you. Before Sapphira could respond, another sound filled the corridor, a soft, deliberate step. The guards turned toward it, their faces paling. Nyla appeared in the doorway, calm as the eye of a storm. The moonlight seemed to follow her, wrapping around her like a second skin. Behind her, wolves filled the hallway, silent, watchful, their golden eyes reflecting the red of the moon. For a long moment, no one spoke. Sapphira took a step back, her voice breaking. What are you? Some ghost come to haunt me? Nyla's lips curved into a sad, calm smile. No ghost, stepmother. Only the truth you buried and the justice you feared. Her voice carried the weight of thunder and the gentleness of falling snow. It was not human anymore, it was something greater, something timeless. The wolves moved aside as Nyla walked forward, her cloak whispering across the marble floor. The guards dropped to their knees, trembling as though the air itself pressed them down. Sapphira stumbled toward the throne room, desperate to flee, but the great doors slammed shut before she could reach them. The wolves surrounded her, forming a circle. Their eyes gleamed, not with hunger, but judgment. The throne room filled with their low growls and the rhythmic pounding of paws on stone, a sound like a heartbeat from the earth itself. Nyla entered, her gaze sweeping over the place where she had once stood as a child, small and obedient, beside her father's throne. Now she stood tall, a living echo of the moon's power. Sapphira's voice trembled as she clung to the arm of the throne. You were a curse upon this land. I did what I had to do. The people feared you, they said the wolves watched you, that you spoke to them. Nyla stepped closer, her eyes glinting. And they were right. The wolves watched because they knew truth when men did not. They heard what your heart whispered when your lips lied. The queen tried to speak, but the words died in her throat as one of the wolves growled, its eyes burning like coals. The forest gave me mercy, Nyla continued, her tone calm, steady. But it demands balance. For every cruelty a reckoning. For every lie a truth. Sapphira fell to her knees. Please, spare me. I did it for the kingdom. To protect it. Nyla knelt before her, and for a heartbeat, her expression softened, not in forgiveness but in sorrow. You fed me to the wolves to protect your throne. But you never understood, stepmother. The wolves were never the monsters. Her hand rose and the wolves' growls deepened. Their shadows stretched long across the marble, moving like black smoke. The monsters, Nyla said, her eyes flashing silver, were already in these halls. The queen screamed as the wind tore through the throne room, swirling around her. The wolves howled in unison, a haunting, beautiful chorus that filled every corridor. The torches ignited in blue flame, revealing the truth carved into the walls. Old symbols of the moon goddess, the same ones Sapphira had ordered erased years ago. The walls themselves seemed to listen, to breathe, to judge. Sapphira crawled backward, trembling. Please don't let them take me. I am your queen. Nyla's voice was quiet. Not anymore. With a flick of her wrist, the wolves moved. They circled closer, their fur brushing against her silken gown. Yet they did not tear or bite. Instead they howled, and the sound pierced her soul. The air shimmered, and in that moment Sapphira's reflection appeared in every polished surface, not as a queen but as a woman wrapped in lies. The throne behind her cracked down the middle, its gold splitting like dried bone. Then silence fell. The wolves stepped back. Sapphira sat frozen, trembling, her crown slipping from her head to the cold marble floor. The echo of its fall rang like a verdict. Nyla stood over her, eyes gleaming faintly with moonlight. Your reign ends tonight. The moon bears witness. The wild remembers. Sapphira looked up, tears streaking her face. Will you kill me? Nyla shook her head slowly. No. The forest will decide. At that, the largest of the wolves, a white one with eyes like mirrors, stepped forward. It stared deep into the queen's soul, then turned away, howling once more toward the blood moon. The light shifted, dimmed, then flared again. When it faded, Sapphira was gone. In her place lay a crown made of frost and thorns. Nyla looked down at it, silent. Then she turned to her pack, her family, her judgment delivered. The kingdom will heal, she whispered. But it will never forget. The wolves bowed their heads. And under the last breath of the red moon, Nyla stepped toward the throne, not as a child cast away, but as the moon's daughter reborn in justice and power. Under the silver wash of dawn, Luara awoke to a silence unlike any it had ever known. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the memory of fear. The wolves that had once struck terror into the hearts of men now roamed freely beside the palace gates, their heads bowed in reverence to the woman who had become more than mortal, Nyla, the moon's daughter. Her eyes no longer held the innocence of youth, but the wisdom of both beast and woman, of forest and flame. She stood before her people, her voice carrying the calm command of the moonlight itself. No crown, she said softly, can rule what it does not understand. Under her reign, the borders between wild and civilization began to blur. The hunters laid down their traps and the farmers left offerings at the edge of the forest. Children grew up knowing the songs of both the river and the wolf. Even the elders who once feared the howling nights began to whisper stories of the queen who could speak to the wild. The land healed slowly as if recognizing that balance had been restored. Sapphira, once adorned in gold and deceit, now wandered the outskirts of the realm, a ghost wrapped in torn silks. Nyla had spared her life, but mercy was a sharper punishment than death. Banished to live among the echoes of her crimes, Sapphira was haunted nightly by the chorus of wolves. Each dream carried the eyes of Nyla, calm, knowing, and unforgiving. The queen who had once silenced the forest now lived in a silence she could never escape. Her palace of stone was replaced by shadows and the cold comfort of regret. As years passed, Luara flourished under Nyla's guidance. The festivals of the moon became sacred, nights where men and wolves danced beneath the stars, celebrating unity rather than fear. The once feared forest became a place of pilgrimage, where seekers came to learn the language of wind and the rhythm of the earth. Nyla taught that to harm the wild was to wound oneself, for both were reflections of the same spirit. Yet even as peace thrived, legends began to grow. Some swore they saw Nyla walking the forest paths long after her time should have ended, her figure bathed in moonlight, her wolves following like shadows. Others claimed that when the moon turned red once every generation, her voice could be heard in the wind, whispering ancient vows of protection. Parents would hush their children at dusk, saying, "Listen, the queen still walks with the pack." One night, under a full moon so bright it turned the river to silver, Nyla stood upon the palace balcony. Below her, the wolves gathered, hundreds strong, their eyes shimmering like constellations. The villagers knelt in quiet awe, not out of fear but devotion. As the breeze stirred her hair, Nyla raised her gaze to the moon, her eternal companion. She remembered the night she had been left to die, the cold earth beneath her, the glowing eyes that had offered not death but belonging. She thought of the wolves who had taught her strength without cruelty, loyalty without submission. The moonlight caressed her face like a mother's hand and she smiled. Then the howls began, deep, resonant, endless. They rose from the forest, from the hills, from every corner of Luara. It was not a cry of war nor of mourning but of unity. It was the voice of a kingdom reborn, wild yet whole. Nyla closed her eyes and joined them, her voice merging with the chorus of the pack, a sound that made the stars tremble. As the moon crowned her in silver, she stood tall, a bridge between the wild and the human, between vengeance and forgiveness. Her legacy was not written in books or carved in stone, but sung in every howl that rose toward the heavens. And long after her body faded into legend, the people of Luara would tell their children of the queen who ruled with both heart and fang, the one who taught them that true power lies not in domination but in harmony. And so, beneath the eternal gaze of the moon, Nyla remained, the queen of the wild, her spirit forever watching over Luara, her song forever carried on the wind.